having us here this afternoon for your lovely event on postpartum depression and breaking the silence. If you are taking me, you need to edit it because I put on a little bit of waste. Get my book angles, please. You know, cut and paste, right? So my name is Cherene Mohammed, and I'm a applied psychologist by profession. Among other things, I do a lot of training and development and consulting, in addition to counseling and so forth. And I have with me today one of my colleagues within the field, Ms. Kera and Hosein. Kera Hosein, who is a related. No, it's because I spoke to my friend Sarah Ann, and they kind of rhymed just before. So, Kera is a counseling psychologist, and she's going to be participating in this talk that we're having today. So again, thanks for having us here. I know initially you all would have reached out to Mr. Hannah Benjamin to do this session. However, when he contacted me, I was all completely a yes for it. Because when I heard it was for the Rotaract Club, I was like, absolutely. You may not have known this, but I'm a past Rotarian. So hearing that this is Rotaract, I was like, absolutely. This is how I'm going to spend my Saturday. It's a no-brainer. I served up to the level of secretary, and that is at the club in 2014. And as your colleague mentioned, joining these type of organizations is a fantastic lifelong learning opportunity. The gems that you get, the experience, the exposure, and the development you get is really fantastic, and it's something that sticks with you. And I can tell you that from my experience, because when I joined that club, I was one of the youngest Rotarians. And I remember it being such an intimidating space, because remember, Rotaract is more younger people, and I joined it when I was around 25 or so. So being that young in a space where you have much more mature, more established people, that was very intimidating. But it was a good experience for me to know how to hold my ground and to be confident in myself and confident in what I know, and it allowed me to enter spaces where I thought I should not have been, but I was able to make noise still. So being in this club is a fantastic opportunity, so take whatever you want from it and use it to your advantage. It is a fantastic opportunity. So again, thank you for having me here. Right, so let's talk about postpartum depression. And it is, again, amazing that you all have chosen to highlight this issue, and rightly so, to put steps in place towards breaking that silence. Because as one of your other colleagues mentioned, when you think about mental health illness, it's very quick on the draw to come up with those derogatory terms, those things to laugh at and to make fun of. But when you think of anything else in terms of a medical condition, we don't get that. We're proactive with medical things, but when it comes to mental health, we take a back seat. I often say we kind of sweep it under the rug, or when you're going to the fridge to get ice, and for some reason, one ice cube always falls. What you do? Kick it under the fridge. Yeah? Kick it under the fridge. It'll melt, and you know, well, whatever happened, happened. I've been guilty of that. And it's unfortunate that when it comes to mental illness and mental health, sometimes that's what we do. We treat it as that fallen ice cube, and we just kick it under the fridge. The darkness, not to be worried with, not to be concerned about. So it's so important for us to have these conversations. And again, Rotaractors, applaud yourself for creating this initiative and this forum to have these conversations. So it's no longer shrouded in any secrecy, in any silence. It's no longer terms to be disregarded, discounted, or disrespected by anyone. Because when you think of postpartum depression, you may think that it's just a female issue, or it's just a mom issue. But no, it's an everyone's issue. So the men in the room, I applaud you. I know that you're not in the majority, even though someone was brave enough to try and bash females and say, this is how all women act, we'll allow them to slide, okay, because that's your president, right? And you're also learning today how postpartum depression also affects men. Exactly. Because, again, as I said, it is not just a female or a mother thing. It is everyone's issue. It's something that affects everyone, whether directly or indirectly. And my job is to not make you an expert. It's not to make you a clinician or a counselor as well, but it's to make you wise, and it is to make you aware. One of the key things with mental illness is about bringing about that awareness. Because when you have that awareness, then you can come back with that silence. You can try to challenge the taboo and the stigma around those things by knowing what it is and what it isn't. Yeah? Yes? Yeah. Oh, I thought it was just me talking. Yeah? So how I present, I like to hear feedback. You don't need to be quiet. If you want to ask me a question, just stop and we have a conversation, right? It's a conversation. It's Saturday afternoon. We relax and we're going to learn something. Yes? Awesome. So, when we think of the whole concept of postpartum depression or even just the idea of motherhood, a lot of times we have a preconceived notion of what it should be. And that is given to us based on society sometimes, what we see other people experiencing, what others might tell you, or even what the textbooks tell you. But for some people, it may not be what I thought it would be. Yeah, so I found it cool to use that meme, that motherhood is exactly what I thought it would be, said no one ever. Even I myself have some unrealistic expectations that when I do become a mother, I'm going to be one of those sassy mummies, pushing the stroller in the high heels and my hair done and my makeup done. I said, I will not be one of those, no makeup, just rushing out the house. But we'll see how that goes, right? Yeah. But what this speaks to is understanding that when it comes to motherhood and childbirth, quite often there's a huge disparity between expectation and reality. Yeah? It's very different, especially for everyone going through it. No two experiences are the same. And that's why we need to have those conversations about postpartum depression and what it is, what it can be, and what it also isn't as well. So when you look at it, it's often perceived in terms of motherhood as this space that is filled with joy. Everybody's like, oh my God, you're pregnant, you're going to be a mommy, how amazing, da da da, etc. The world greets you and meets you with all of that fanfare. But for some people, that fanfare reaches only here. It does not permeate within. So now you have someone who's hearing so much from other people. Oh, this is so amazing, your life is going to change, you're so lucky. But on the inside, they're dying. They're struggling. They hate the experience. They feel alien, alone, and isolated. And the unfortunate thing is, these people don't always get help. Because those terms I use in itself prevents it. You feel ashamed, and you feel guilty, and you feel, oh, maybe I'm not grateful enough for having this experience that so many people wish they could have. And I have it, and I don't feel any way about it. And that's one of the challenges with postpartum depression and why it's allowed to be so significant in other people's lives, because it's easily underdiagnosed and labeled incorrectly. There's a very important saying in that the whole process of journeying to motherhood isn't just about that future offspring or that baby to come. Yes, that's going to be a newborn. But I say in that period of time, there's two births. Birth of the baby and birth of that woman into a mother. And nobody ever understands that. How many times, if you have any, know people who are pregnant or have been, you would have heard people say, well, it's no longer about you, it's about the child now. And to be quite honest, I'm guilty of that as well. I'm making such a callous statement. But it is about the individual. It is about the mommy going through it. Because she doesn't know how her body is going to react. Yes, we might read some commonalities and stuff, But when you're actually in that fire, only then you would know what is actually happening. So it's so important for us as the observers to someone going through motherhood, pregnancy, childbirth, to be mindful of not just the baby who's coming, that is a vulnerable creature, but to be mindful of the woman as well and her vulnerability to that new role that is thrust upon her. So, if anything you do, it's important for you to remember that mothers need just as much attention as a newborn because they too have just been born. So in the same way we expect mothers to mother and nurture and care for and support their babies, we have to do that for them as well. And in terms of being their support system and providing that support, providing that love, and also being observant as well to notice if things are not what they should be. So there are many new cases of mothers suffering from maternal depression each year, and it's something as simple, they say, or as common as women being diagnosed with breast cancer. The American Academy of Pediatrics, they noted that maternal depression is the most underdiagnosed obstetric complication in America. And by far, you could extend that sort of literature or point to the Caribbean as well. The unfortunate thing is we don't tend to have a lot of research or statistics that come about from it. But it's something definitely that is heavily misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed on a global level. Right? Yes.
On that note, so have anything ever been done to change this? The representation of, in terms of paternal depression, because it's not done in Caribbean, so
no.
Is it being done or has anything been done?
Not that I'm aware of in a large scale, but we can hope with continued awareness, and I think mental illness is definitely going through a phase of people really being more passionate about breaking that stigma. So hopefully that can create opportunities to look at more studies and do more research, and again that's where us as the persons in the field also have to take up the mantle and start doing that research as well. To get our own statistics and to get our own information to see what we need to do and what we're actually dealing with. Yeah? So to understand postpartum depression, as I said, it's important to understand what it is and what it isn't. So I'm going to cover some things relating to baby blues, jump back into postpartum depression, and then talk about postpartum psychosis, which is a more severe form of it when it treatment or the right intervention isn't received by the individual. So when you think of baby blues, this is something that is natural. It's something that naturally happens after childbirth. It's very transient because it's not long-lasting, nor is it permanent. It usually peaks around the 3rd to 5th day after childbirth and lasts about 10 to 14 days. And it's a period that is categorized by a lot of irritability, and you can feel very emotionally overloaded. However, as I said, it's not long-lasting. So baby blues is not a disorder. It's perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. And with the right nutrition, rest, and support, positive support, it naturally resolves itself. So that's something to be mindful of. Baby blues naturally happens. Now, and also, one critical thing is that it does not affect the mother's ability to care for her child or children, right? So some symptoms of baby blues, you would see things such as mild mood swings, the experience of anxiety, sadness, crying spells, reduced concentration, appetite, trouble sleeping. And the whole act of giving birth, that in itself is a lot of hormonal fluctuations, lack of sleep, you may not be eating as much. So that in itself can also feed back into some of the symptomatology you would see with baby blues and what a woman can experience within this period. Now with postpartum depression, what makes it much more significant and impactful on the individual is the intensity of the symptoms that are experienced. So they'll be experiencing these type of symptoms, yes, but the intensity is much more. In addition to which, the duration as well is critical. So whereas with your baby blues, you have it for a 10 to 14 days sort of thing, with postpartum depression, it's much more than that. It's just like if you have a cold. On average, a cold, let's say, what, 3 to 5 days, if you're really lucky, yeah? But if you have, and you already go to a doctor for the cold, but if you say by day 8, day 10, you still have the cold, you're going to tell yourself something is up, and I need to go. But when it comes to depression and mental illness, we don't do these things. You know? We just say, you know what? Just wait it out. Or we just don't even think about it at all. The ice block effect. So women experiencing postpartum depression, they often feel much pain during a time that should be joyful. Again, that disparity between expectation and reality. Many are reluctant to tell someone when they feel this way. And it's important to understand that it is a medical condition. It is not just a condition that somebody should just get over, that they're exaggerating, that they're just trying to get attention. It is a medical condition. It's very real, it's very serious, but it is also treatable. Yeah? So you always need to instill that sense of hope within that individual. How are we going so far? Good? Yeah? If you all were litty good for your icebreaker, eh? So some research coming out of a psychiatry journal, and this is a really nice study because it's one of the most known studies where they actually did some research on a large cross-section of women, and approximately 10,000 women. And what they found was that 1 in 7 women suffer from postpartum depression. That's 40.1%. That's huge. That's huge. Because on average, in terms of just general depression, meaning not just women, it's about 26%. So to have a 40% number, that's high, right? 26.5%, they would have experienced some type of depressive episode before pregnancy, and 33% would have had an experience of depression during pregnancy, which you call it peripartum, right? Over 2/3 of the women also had signs of anxiety disorder. Because as you may not know, but oftentimes when it comes to mental illness, there's a high level of comorbidity with certain disorders. Depression being one of them, always has some type of anxiety attached to it as well. So sometimes when you're looking at diagnoses, you always look at a primary diagnosis and a secondary diagnosis as well. It's critical to always understand everything. 1 in 5, or 19.3%, would have had thoughts of harming themselves. And these thoughts of harming themselves may not always translate into actually harming themselves, but it's because of the hormonal fluctuations, the women may be bombarded with those type of thoughts. And it feeds back into that feeling of guilt, shame, feeling as a failure. If you are actually experiencing postpartum depression, then you're saying, well, maybe I should just give up. Maybe I should just end my life so my child will have a better life without me. Because whatever is happening here can't be good. And we see 22.6% of the group studied, they were also diagnosed with bipolar depression as well. So again, to the comorbidity, and you all did a very nice illustration for your disorders. So kudos to you for that as well. Some characteristics of postpartum depression: we see about 10 to 15% of women after delivery, and it usually starts within 1 to 3 months and can last up to 1 year. But the average duration for postpartum is around 7 months, right? But again, it can last longer if it is not treated and the right intervention is received. Because with depression in general, you know, if you kind of start and stop treatment, your instances of relapse are very high. With postpartum depression as well, the symptoms are there most of the time. So with baby blues, those things may fluctuate. But with postpartum depression, it stays with that individual. So again, it's harder for them to kind of shake and come out of that. And some women, they have noted to even experiencing postpartum depression, not with their first child, but multiple births, their second, third, sixth child. And that might be an interesting fact, because sometimes you think it's only it's for new mommy, but postpartum depression affects veteran mommies as well. Because no two pregnancies are ever the same. And again, as I said, you don't know how your body is going to respond. Pregnancy is literally a period of no control. You can plan as much as you want, have those birth plans, say you're going to do all those things, and then your body says, otherwise. Yeah? So again, some more characteristics of postpartum. A quarter of women are still affected at that child's first birthday. And fathers and partners also experience postpartum depression. Now, whereas with women you have about a 1 in 7, with men you have approximately 1 in 10. But it's also something very real and very important that quite often may not be spoken about as loudly as postpartum depression. So again, we need to even have more conversations on understanding postpartum depression in males and partners by extension. Yeah? And with this, you know, it creates a lot of strain on an individual's life. So it can contribute to, you know, marriages, breaking up, and impact your children as well. And again, as I said, it's highly overlooked and underdiagnosed internationally. So why we need to worry about postpartum depression? Because of hormones. Women go through so much hormones, so men will laugh at us. We go through so many hormonal fluctuations at different times in our life, whether premenstrual, postpartum, or around that menopausal period. And we don't know how our bodies can respond or react at any given day. And not to be TMI for the guys, but for my ladies, we all know when it's that time of the month, you never know what your body gonna do to you. 1 minute you might be feeling okay, next minute you're crying for no reason. Yeah? So all those things feed back into the experience and the suffering of postpartum depression, right? And on top of that, we now have to give birth, which again, no control over what is happening. Yeah? So the incidence of depression among women peaks between 18 to 44 years of age, and this coincides with childbearing age. Women in their childbearing years account for the largest group of Americans with depression. And it is common in about 16.5 to 20% of women to experience this, but it can also be up to more like 80% can experience postpartum depression to some degree. So all may not have an actual diagnosis because there are some critical markers, but they may experience some degree of postpartum depression. Remembering everybody has different life experiences and different social environments. So that plays a big factor in terms of if those things are going to be controlled, minimized, or maximized as well. Yeah? So some symptoms of postpartum depression.
So some symptoms of postpartum depression, they include, well, as she was saying about the baby blues, I'm so sorry, my voice is not so great today. Yeah, so you experience a lot of depressed mood. Mothers, they tend to feel a lot of guilt and shame for not being able to bond with their child. They feel like they can't bond with their child. They feel like they don't love their child. They experience irritability, low energy, a lot of fatigue, sleep or appetite, disturbances, sleeping, loss, hopelessness, loss of interest and pleasure. They don't do activities that once made them happy. They just have no interest in doing so anymore. They feel very overwhelmed by being a mother. They have thoughts of harming themselves. They have thoughts of even harming their infant. They just have a lot of, they can also experience suicidal thoughts. So these symptoms, they range between mild and severe, and as I explained in the latter, the severe symptoms include the thoughts of dying, thoughts of suicide, wanting to flee or get away, being unable to feel love with the baby, thoughts of harming the baby, thoughts of not being able to protect the infant, hopelessness. PPD symptoms, they don't last for just a few days. A half of the women are symptomatic for up to 6 months, and a third of women continue to be symptomatic at 12 months, especially if it's left untreated.
So and you're having those conversations when you're doing any screeners to make a diagnosis for postpartum depression. This is what we would look at, and again it feeds back into the symptomatology. The critical thing we look for is that duration and the intensity of the symptoms experienced. Unfortunately, within the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the division that psychologists use, it doesn't recognize postpartum depression on its own as a mental disorder. It falls under the major depressive disorder. So for some practitioners, it's a clamoring to get its own label and to be something different. So that's just a side note for you, and so you have awareness of how it is in terms of what we look at when we diagnose someone who comes in that may present with those type of things. Postpartum depression affects not only the woman, but it affects the children as well, the babies. And you see things such as behavioral problems happening, sleep problems and aggression, as well as hyperactivity. There's cognitive delays, so that child might have challenges in walking and talking according to the trajectory of normal childhood development. Also problems in school, adjustment issues, social problems, difficulty developing relationships. Because the unfortunate thing with postpartum depression is that it robs the mommy and the baby of critical periods or opportunities for bonding. Okay? And we know that maternal bonding is something very important towards human development. So if you have that issue of postpartum depression and a mother feeling that she cannot give love, cannot give warmth, then you see how it can have secondary adversities to not only just her life, but others as well. Okay? You see also psychological problems, a higher risk of developing depression as well. And I think there's a lot of research in that field where with the mommy experiencing depression, there's a high risk factor for the children also developing some type of depression as well.
There was actually a study done by JAMA Psychiatry in 2018, and it found that children teens between the ages of 16 to 18, they had more depressive episodes compared to other children when their mothers had the baby.
And then postpartum affects babies as well. It's more common than you think. We have about 10.4% from the first trimester to 1 year after delivery. It's the biggest correlation with depression in the partner. So your partner experiencing postpartum depression as a mommy. The dads are also at a high risk of that as well. And you see a lot of changes in men, more in terms of like violent behavior, physical aggression. It creates a deep sense of conflict for them in terms of being the man, and that I should not be experiencing depression. I should not, have crying spells or feeling isolated and overwhelmed. So that's a big challenge when it comes to men and even talking about postpartum depression because of the whole manliness issue attached to it as well. Postpartum psychosis. So according to Mayo Clinic, some women can develop a rare condition that develops within 2 weeks of delivery, and this is postpartum psychosis. Now it is postpartum depression, but it goes on to the more far end of the spectrum. When I think of mental illness, you always think of a spectrum from mild, moderate to severe. And this is when it gets to that severe level, having hallucinations and that type of thing. My fellow thinking government is trying to get in his head with the phone and that sort of thing. And that coincides as well with having those harmful and suicidal thoughts. I think, I'm not sure if you all would remember, but I believe maybe was it a few years back, we had a very notable case of postpartum psychosis and depression happening where there was a young mother who jumped to her death about 40 feet.
Yeah. Into the water.
Yeah. So it happens everywhere. But it affects about 1 in 1,000 women who give birth, and the percentages for it is very small. So it's about 0.1 to 0.2%, but it's still something that is worthy of awareness and conversation because of the fact that its counterpart of postpartum depression, again, does not get diagnosed or recognized as easily or as quickly as it needs to be. So some signs and symptoms, you have the hallucinations and delusions, confusion and disorientation, paranoia, so attempts at self-harm and to harm the baby, and the risk for postpartum psychosis is higher for women with bipolar disorder, because that's also a very serious mental health disease.
Do y'all remember the movie Shutter Island?
Yeah.
Yes. She was a prime member of the Royal Family.
So when to seek medical advice? If signs and symptoms of depression do not fade after a couple of weeks, it's important for women to tell their doctors. And if depression is impeding from doing everyday tasks, it's important for you to alert your physician. And one of the opportunities with pregnancy is that it positions a woman much more frequently with healthcare providers. So use that time. I mean, if your loved one, your friend, your colleague, and you notice something isn't wrong, speak up, say something, and help someone get that support that they may need. Because what you may realize is that the individual may not actually know or realize something is happening or wrong to them. So as the outside person, it's easier for you to make the observation and to help them get some type of help, right? It's important because, again, you don't want to have those long-lasting effects with social relationships, with childhood relationships, with family relationships. So seeking treatment is very important. And I'm not going to go too far into it because I believe one of the other speakers are going to go into that. And on that note, I just want to leave with you, if anything else, if you know someone who is experiencing postpartum depression, if you've heard about it or anything like that, again, give that hope to that person and let them know that you're not a bad mother, you're not a bad partner, you're not a bad person, and also that you're not alone. Postpartum depression can be helped. It is fixable, and that's one of the good things with it. It is fixable once intervention happens. And remind everyone to please, please, please do not suffer in silence. Thank you, everyone. Any questions? Yes.
It's not, well, I just want to, first of all, just on behalf of the club, thank you guys for coming out here. I was sitting here reflecting on the fact, sorry, I was sitting here and reflecting on the fact that this topic is such a taboo topic and a lot of people do not speak about it. And the mere fact that we were able to have you come and help us break that silence, it's something that it's going to mean a lot. There's going to be a ripple effect of this. There's going to be people who are going to see this and be able to feel a little more confident about, if not themselves, but somebody who might experience it to help somebody else. So I just want to really thank you guys for that. One of the things that I wanted to find out is there a space where somebody could go? Because, all right, I recognize that X, Y, and Z is happening with my friend or my partner. What do I do next? Do I call? Yeah.
So we have quite a bit of mental health providers and psychiatrists locally that can provide intervention. If not, and you don't know where to go in terms of those private persons, you can look at the medical institutions themselves, and they will also give you referrals for that in terms of providers and how to seek help. But the critical thing for you all would be to be that support person for that individual. And again, walk with them, let them know that they're not alone. I'm here with you, I can help you. Even something as if you have a friend and just had a baby. Don't just go and sit down and look at the baby. Oh, yeah, cute, 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 cute. Ask, what you need help with. Or you know what, you go in the kitchen and you start to wash up a little dishes, and all those things can make a difference for the individual. So it's small things that can be done. Now, if it is where, the symptomatology that you may be observing is very extreme, then that person might need more of a medical intervention in terms of having some sort of medication to help stabilize them. So that's where your psychiatrists come in. So again, that's why I mentioned going towards your EHS and your medical services, hospitals, etc., to get them that direct line intervention would be important. Because if they come to a psychologist and they are not stable, meaning they're even on that part of more psychosis, we would not be able to do as much without, unfortunately, the assistance of medication to get that person stabilized so their brains are clearer, their emotions are calmer, so they can actually feed into and understand and process what is going on with them. I hope that helps. Yeah?
One more thing, so is there any relationship between postpartum depression and mothers who may have lost their baby?
Meaning, like a current loss or previous loss?
Like a current, like I'm pregnant, and then I think first semester trimester lose my baby. Is there some sort of?
I'm not sure if it would be more postpartum, because remember the word itself, postpartum, is post-childbirth. But that itself might fall more on grief and trauma, especially if the birthing experience was traumatic. But there's also, there is postpartum PTSD, so it may fall under that in itself. It's a whole umbrella of things that can happen.
Will that apply if you you deliver a stillborn?
It can apply in terms of the postpartum PTSD part of it, with that experience of the loss of a child and having to deliver a stillborn baby. That in itself is a traumatic experience. Yes.
Just based on what President Matisse said, so a number of things in that he had mentioned that persons are still not comfortable speaking about it or even discussing it. So then you as an individual or a loved one who care about that person may not get welcome in speaking about that. So how then can we create a medium where persons are just like Quora or WikiLeaks or something, where persons, or even Facebook, just having like a Facebook group where persons, okay, just like you would have a mothers in TNT or fathers in TNT, where persons can then plug into that resource and connect with like-minded persons and get help or get referral, okay, because they might not feel comfortable speaking to you, but psychologists, oh no, I don't have a problem, and that's shunned immediately. What is guiding them along the process? So how then can you?
I mean, what you can do is provide them with information and do that along with, again, I'm going to say that support that you're providing to that individual, working with them and letting them know that they're not alone in this journey. Because the unfortunate thing when it comes to mental illness, yes, you can recognize, you can want to help, but if that person isn't willing, there's only so much you can do. So give them the information and let them know, you know what, something really, I don't think this is what it should be. So maybe let's go find out. And as we mentioned, we had a doctor we could just go talk to and get some information. I don't know what medical place you go and you get wine. Let me know that session. But just take down the intensity of how you encourage them to vote it, because sometimes we might be a little bit too intense with wanting to help. We have to be mindful of how helpful this sometimes. So give them the information and allow them time to process. Remember, depression is like a wet blanket, a dark, deep fog you can't see through. So even if you give them that information, it's staying there for a while, they can't even see that. So you need to be patient. Reinforcement as well will also be helpful. Right? So information, support, reinforcement, and again giving that person time. But if it is, you see that it's really becoming much more of a serious issue, that kind of thing, then you want to take more action, get the medical services and all that kind of thing. I don't want to take up too much of your, I see your Director of Finance watching this watch there. So again, thank you so much everyone, and job well done so well, but then others were drowned in the tub, and she was left alone. She had the classic presentation, if you read the case, of numbness. So there wasn't crying, there wasn't like overt signs of depression, but it was numbness, it was irritability, but it was also a retreat
a real retreat inward. There's a real submission to this is a silent pain. This is something that when you're in that sense of numbness, you're not even able to communicate the depths of what that feels like. You can't even begin to find words. So this is why she was in a psychosis, and this is why it was missed. And if you read that case, even law enforcement will talk about how hard it was for them to have encountered that scene, because they range from something like 8 to just a few months old. So yes, it does happen, but it is very rare, and that's very important for us to note, is that postpartum psychosis is rare, but it can be prevented, and we have to know that numbness and that irritability, you need to pay attention. You need to ask them, are they seeing anything? Are they hearing anything? Because hallucinations are not just visual, they're auditory. And it's also olfactory, sometimes smells, certain smells, different things, feeling presence, people around that are not around. Anyway, we don't have the time to delve into that. But if we go, those are the main myths. I would say those are the main myths. And another main myth is that it's my fault, I have PPD. Guilt, a lot of guilt, internalized guilt. And that's often from situations where there may not be a lot of support and you're left alone in your postpartum days. And if there's not a lot of support, there's a lot of risk for that young family or those parents who are struggling on their own. Guess when that increases? Like now in our society, when we have huge changes in our economy. So I want to kind of bring us to the here and now, because we have a real limitation in our local statistics. We don't have local statistics on PPD, any sort of reliable ones, I should say. Globally, it's 10 to 15% of women diagnosed with PPD, but given our society and the history, there's notorious underreporting. So we don't have, and that's because of the stigma. That's because of guilt, that's because of fear of judgment, that's because of a whole lot of things. Like, I should not be experiencing these things. And part of the reason why they don't report a lot of the times is because, you know, I like to say the hard work begins when the baby is born, outside of any complications that you have in your pregnancy, because then everybody kind of leaves you and you're alone, and you have to struggle and push through. And those are the times when there's risk. Immediately after childbirth, and the first couple of weeks is when we have to really pay attention to these families, to our loved ones. And if I bring it back to the here and now, when I said the economy, financial constraints, you have people who are under enormous pressure. So if you think about what financial challenges does to a relationship generally, you know, we argue, we bicker about money, you know, it's never enough, or you're not doing this, or I have to do this, and far less of inequity in terms of male-female income, and our own egos and manhood, and, you know, women perhaps abusing their power, I will say it, in some ways when we are the income earners. I'm a woman, I'm a female, I run my own business. I understand how this is, I have to take responsibility for that as well. I think we all do, in terms of how our feeling of power and control and how we use it. In times like this, you need to really be aware of how this impacts the relationship. It really, so you're already arguing about that, right? Then you throw a baby in the mix. You're already probably in debt from having to pay off if you didn't go public. And you have all these things you have to do. And then throw in relationship challenges. So actually the fathers, what they show in terms of fathers at risk for PPD, three main factors. A history of depression, so you've had to have had either depression in your family or history of experiencing depression. Relationship challenges, so not only your current relationship, but if you've had a history of connection difficulties and pushing through when there's conflict, if you avoid, if you don't address, as well as financial constraints. Those are often the three top risk factors for men. And the fact that, I'll throw in another one, I think men are not given proper paternal leave. And I wish that we had somebody from the Single Fathers Association here to kind of back up how important it is that fathers have the opportunity and the time to connect with their kid. I think that the mother would also feel a lot more supported and less abandoned, because there's that real feeling of abandonment and loss and loneliness. So from the father's side, those are key factors that we want to look at. And also, something that I have known, but I want to just say it really loudly here: new fathers are at increased risk of depression despite their partner's suffering. So what that means is that whether the partner is suffering or not, new fathers are increased risk for PPD. This is something we really need to shout at the rooftops. If this is a forum for advocacy, any young men in here that have a partner that is pregnant, this is you've never had a baby before, not saying it can't happen after, right? Because your finances can change, your relationship could be in a different place. You know, those same risk factors will come into play. But globally, we see new fathers are at increased risk, and we need to support them and we need to include them in the conversation. All right, other causal risk factors. We're talking about specifically for women, and I want to say if we know this, if we educate ourselves, we could actually be preventative, which is always what a mental health professional wants. We don't want to always be in there dealing with problems. We want to, this is why I'm happy to be here and I'm privileged to be here, because if my 20 minutes can help shift perspective as to what this is and how it could be all around us and we're just not aware, it can help us tune in so that when we have our own journeys with pregnancy, if that happens, whether male or female, that we can kind of learn to tune in a little bit better. And if that's not meant for us, then great, you could support your loved ones who may be going through this experience. So specifically for women, we have something called genetic predisposition to depression. This is true for men as well. So what that means is in your family system, there's a history of mood disorder, right? So whether it's depression, there are many different types of depression. I'm not going to go into that right here. But the point is, if you have a history in your family, typically, genetically, this manifests itself in different ways. Not every sibling from that lineage is going to get it. Sometimes it's skip siblings, sometimes somebody has mild depression, sometimes somebody has it more severe. But once it's a history in the family, that's one key factor that puts you at risk, or family risk. Something that I realized the first speaker talked about, but I just want to highlight it a little bit more. Hormonal changes for women is huge, has a lot to do with during the birthing process and post-childbirth. There's a drop in estrogen and progesterone, and those are key female hormones to regulate mood, to regulate stress tolerance, to regulate emotions, or what we call emotion control, and self-regulation, your behavior and your emotions. So when you have that happening, that is one key risk factor that we can begin to track, that you're going to have an increased risk. Another thing too that a lot of people don't talk about, your thyroid. So the doctors that I work with, that's the first thing we look for, the TSH hormone. So your thyroid gland overall is that when you think we have depression, you don't just treat depression. You want to rule out other causes of depression. But in PPD, thyroid function, the shift in that hormone as well, we have to rule out, not just estrogen and progesterone. So I'm hoping if that was a mention, that kind of rings a bell, or kind of remember that those are the hormones that we're looking for in terms of the drop, right? The decrease, if you will. It's not that you don't have it. It's just a sharp decrease post-childbirth, which really increases the risk. A big risk, and I could speak to this myself because I have a toddler who just turned 3 and is very demanding. When you become a mother or you become a new parent, there's this whole loss of personal identity. There's this, you know, people make you feel like, you know, everything is about the baby, you know, like your whole life doesn't exist outside of this little one and your responsibilities. Huge risk for PPD, because if we are not honoring the other parts of ourselves, then that means we don't have balance. That means that we can't cope. and then you throw in these other risk factors, it's just going to make us even more alone, even less purposeful, with a lack of feeling of joy in our life. Because if you have a child in particular that has temperament issues, so I want to say how this affects the kid. Typically, a mother who's untreated with PPD will have difficulties connecting their whole lives, and that's huge. Because their temperament, they're not being soothed by their parents. Let's say both have, and not just mom. But even if it's just mom, remember, if you're breastfeeding, all these things, there's a huge dependency and connection to that person. And if I'm not being soothed, or I'm not getting the skin-to-skin contact, the core mechanisms that help me to feel connected before language and anything else can connect me, then it means I don't know what it's like to soothe myself if my mother has not, or if my family has not taught me how to self-soothe. I haven't had that, so that means, and worse yet, you throw colic and other complications in the mix. You have a child that's screaming, that's hard to work with. They may have sleep difficulties, eating issues. They may be fussy eaters, or they may not eat at all, or they may have allergic reactions, or all kinds of things. So it's sleep, eating, temperament, as well as an increased risk of emotional and behavioral problems as they develop. So PPD has a lot more risk than just the parents. And because one of my areas that I work with primarily are teens and young adults, I see it. So when I go to birth trauma, like I ask about birth trauma, I do trauma work, so I would talk about what was it like, so when I interview the parents, what was it like during the pregnancy, not just physical complications, but after? Did you feel supported? What was it like with this child? You wanted to ask the question? Yeah. I don't know if we're doing that.
It's up to you. You can take questions afterwards.
I'm happy to answer one, but given that we have two really amazing speakers in the back, I don't know if you want to hold it until after. Just because I don't want to disrupt their flow and be disrespectful to them. Write it, but I think it's important because we need to have a dialogue. Where was I? Yes, the consequences. Oh yes, so beyond the kids, if depression postpartum is not treated in mothers, there's an increased risk of future episodes of depression. Very important. It can become chronic, and then if it's not chronic, you can just have recurring episodes. So maybe not chronic in terms of severity, but a frequency, an increased frequency, right? I'm going to finish up the causal factors so we could get to what can we do to help, because it's 5 o'clock. All right. Some of the causal factors that I'm just going to selectively talk about: multiple births, increased demand. So mothers who have multiple births, we want to look up on them. We want to check up on them because they are also at increased risk. So if they have key risk factors, genetic history to depression, change in hormone levels, if you have your loved one saying all these things and you remember these things, multiple births, again, increasing the risk, all hitting the increased risk factor, right? I really want to say this very loudly. You see, prior relationship difficulties with that partner is only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse when the child has come into this world, and you'll now have increased stress and increased demands. So if the relationship doesn't have a solid foundation, you're in some trouble. You're in some real trouble in terms of adjustment. So it's very important to kind of spot when the relationship needs support. I already talked about the financial difficulties, and worldwide social support is important. Yeah, it's nice to have people. It's nice to have a relief system. Very critical for parents. Like, I adore my son, but I want him to go for an hour or two so that I could just watch a movie to completion or just watch an episode. One thing with mothers and parents is like, I never get to finish anything. I start it, he comes in, and I'm just like, so that's a joke between my husband and I. We start watching something, either I fall asleep because I'm so exhausted, he finishes watching it, I can't watch it. Who's tugging on me? What does he want? My sleep is disrupted. So yeah, so this is in life. So if you don't have a family or a sister or somebody just, all right, I'm gonna take him to run. I'm like, just tie him out and bring him back. You know, because we need that time. So just relief is so critical. We don't have to pay for babysitting. Just give those parents an hour or two. It is amazing. Because then I want him back. I'm like, you come in? You know? So it doesn't mean I'm not connected, but you just need space. Okay? So what can we do? What can we do as loved ones? So forums like this, absolutely, because you want to educate yourself on, you can't notice the signs, it's too subtle. Like even professionals sometimes could miss it if things are being underreported, especially in post-op care. So I also work with gynecologists who would send patients if they are concerned about PMDD, which is premenstrual, the type of depressive disorder that can occur from menstrual cycle issues, menopause, and different things, right? But in terms of childhood, if they are tracking and they're educated, they can also start kind of giving that number to support system or support group, which MAMATOTO has, which I didn't talk about, all right? So you want to be able to direct your family and friends to support, but if you educate yourself on the signs, you're going to start to see some of those early risk factors. A big thing is sustaining routine for their kids or for their lives. If you have to help them drop, pick up, you know, food, big thing. If I'm depressed, the house is a mess, this child is screaming and I can't seem to get this child down, I'm not getting the support from my partner, I might just need to eat. I might just need a little space. These are things that we can do. But you see, sustaining a routine for families is very important because it's very easy to just submit to the depression and not do anything, not get out of bed, not shower. Sometimes it's just about getting that routine, and the routine and structure can help stabilize. Just that alone. Compassion. You know, we say it, but I think part of why it's underreported is because of huge judgment. And we just want to, even if we don't understand yet, we just want to acknowledge what they're feeling and what is happening. Because then you could slip into, it's going to be okay. How you know you're going to be okay? How are you going to know everything will be fine? Please don't say these things, because it actually communicates a complete lack of understanding. And it actually could be one of the worst things you could tell people. Because it just feels like you're not even hearing what I'm saying. Daily chores. Really, really important. If you can help with just washing dishes or clearing the living room or something, just things like that make a huge difference. Because if you walk into a space and you see less chaos, even the mind acknowledges less chaos, and then it begins to have some order and structure. And just less judgment. If you don't understand, ask questions, read, talk to people. You know, makes a big difference. So thank you. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much, Sachelle. I would just ask you to come back up to answer Glenn's question.
And anybody
and
else?
he also wants to take a picture too.
Oh.
So, Glenn.
Yeah, the reason why I have a person question, right?
Yes.
So I have a godson,
Yes.
and his mother, I'm concerned about his mother.
What about the dad?
The dad,
Yes. You see, I ask these questions.
yeah,
On
so
purpose.
I'm concerned about both of them actually.
Right.
Because they have a way of dealing with things. The baby is 2 years old, right?
Yeah.
The mother's life is completely wrapped around the child.
So lots
Like,
of personal identity.
still breastfeeding at
Talk
2.5 years old.
Yeah, that's an emotional red flag.
Every time, like, you can't leave, trying to assist them to
Yeah.
pull away the child at a time. Like, no, like, there's no life without the son being there.
So,
And this is at 2.5, because the period they had up there is up to a year, but I'm still seeing these issues up to 2.5 years
and
old.
that speaks to recurrent depressive episodes, but there's something else going on here. There's more than just the depression. There's a complete loss of personal identity. It's causing her to do things with the child in terms of prolonged breastfeeding. There's some value. I mean, lots of people have different ideas. I think post-2, that's more about you. That's more about you and your need for connection or something that you need from that baby, not what's optimal for the child in terms of nutrition. But it would be good to ask the MAMATOTO people that. I would want to hear that perspective, being a midwife, or if they have a different view. But from a psychological view, that fosters emotional dependency. That is where you're developing codependent relationships from a very early stage in development. That sets that child up to not trust themselves, to not separate and individuate from their parents.
But that is what I mean, and he has a temper as well, at 2.5 years, so that's a very bad thing.
Yeah, and some of that is the transition between the terrible 2s into 3, but then it's exacerbated by the situation. So loss of personal identity here is huge, and the fact that the mother is not getting something emotionally, whether it's in the relationship with her partner or other stressors that we might not be aware of, meaning incidents or factors influencing her life. But it's more than just depression going on here. If she's not getting her emotional needs met in the relationship or elsewhere, then this baby is now a surrogate for her emotional needs. So she needs help, the partner needs help, it's probably likely they need to do couples counseling. Like, I'm looking at it from a holistic perspective, because if we just target the mother, we kind of miss the point. Anything else? Anybody has? Yes. We're going in order. We're going to be like giving up.
Yes. I think mine is really short, so I'll go.
Okay.
I love what you said about judgment and having less judgment. But do you think some of the judgment could come from the grandparents, bearing in mind that the generation now has changed, where the grandparents would have usually made a lot more children compared to now, where persons make 1 to 2 children. So sometimes they look down and they're like, why are you complaining over your one pick-me, your one child? I had to raise 8 or 9 or 10, you know, and you are complaining over your one child, and they're like, it's not the same. You have no stress, you have no pressure. So then sometimes you could end up feeling alone.
It's minimizing of your feelings big time, and it's a huge comparative judgment that is unfair. And the world has changed, and the demands on mothers have changed for sure. Are you asking me how do I deal with that?
Yes, how would you deal with that?
It's all about boundary setting. We need to set firm boundaries, and if you as a mother can't, your partner has to step in and do it when you are not emotionally able to. So if I'm irritable and frustrated and overwhelmed and tired and I can't set boundaries, somebody has to assist me in that setting of a boundary. So this is where, if you have a strong relationship foundation, you could kind of say, listen, she's acting up again and she's driving me crazy, so handle that. Handle that scene, right? So if your partner is willing to do that for you, then not only does that build a relationship, because that means you all could look to each other, you all could have that connection, you start to understand what each other needs. But yes, big time, everybody wants to open their mouth, everybody wants to tell you what you're doing, what you're not doing. It's a real difficult thing. And sometimes people that you love, and you just kind of have to be like, listen, this is my child, this is me and so's child, we are here, are listening, I acknowledge it, but you know, we look to you if we need help. Or sometimes it's just about disengaging. So beyond the boundary setting, sometimes you need to just end that conversation and move on. Get yourself out of that. Because if you're flooding yourself with those kinds of thoughts, you're just going to get even, you're just going to spiral down. Either you're going to get angry and have an outburst and damage another relationship, or you're just going to submit to those feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. I hope I answered your question.
You did, thank you.
My question was on the definition of postpartum depression in terms of the male perspective. Because my understanding was that postpartum depression was caused by certain hormonal, as you were saying, hormonal changes in the woman after birth. So I wanted to know if it's the same terminology for men. Is it depression or is it postpartum depression for men?
That's a really excellent question. In the literature, it is PPD for males. That's my understanding, unless there's been something recent that I didn't see. But the causal factors are different. So, but hormonal changes, as you would have realized, are not the only one. It has to, typically there must be a predisposition to depression, or a history of previous depression, or depression in the family, even if the person hasn't suffered yet. Once there's a history in the family system, Once you have that, with hormonal changes, with different things happening in the environment, lack of social support, relationship challenges, financial constraints, that also affects the mother. But in terms of the father, what the literature is saying is attachment dysfunction, which is I have difficulty connecting with people generally, this is for the father, and I've had a long history of relationship problems, financial constraints because there's still the belief that the man has to handle things, and if it's on my back and I have this to pay and that to pay, which shouldn't be, but there could be a perception that it is. That, in addition to a history of depression himself, is what will create the pathway for him suffering. So yeah, it's not clearly defined. It's easy to kind of get confused as to what's the difference and what's the pathway within which both could suffer. Anyone else? Hi.
If you recognize that you need to feel close, is there any preemptive care?
MAMATOTO has groups even before you give birth, so preparing you for that process. When I was pregnant, I had a doula, which a lot of people don't know about. It's a birth coach, and it's somebody who takes you through not just the physical steps of labor, but should do some emotional work with you. Not a therapist, but a support, somebody who is a healthcare professional themselves in some form, a former nurse, a midwife, whatever, and can really pick up for you if you're not yet seeing it, or you're seeing it as a way of kind of getting it confirmation, or should I get support? Support groups are huge for PPD, I think, because it's such an isolated, dark, silent experience. We need the validation of other people saying, you know what, you're not alone, this is happening, it happens, it's okay, and you have support and you're not alone. It's huge. So I think support groups would be the first step, not individual therapy. Yeah. Okay.
Unfortunately.
I was ready to run. I was ready to run because my husband is with the toddler, probably going crazy. So, what do I do? You can come a little bit closer to the banner. Yeah, I'm kind of media sharing, so nobody warned me about this. Just now? Okay, relax. Tell me when you're ready. Okay, ready? Yes, all right. Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy the
you.
rest of the evening, guys.
Thank you.
That having a baby is not just like having sex. I got pregnant. You're having a baby. Right? It's just that simple. Right? And because of the society that we live in today, there are even more stressors on us when we're having a baby. So it's extremely important. I heard, what's your name? Crystal talk about her experience, right? And everything comes because you have to be educated, right? And there is education available. But a lot of us, we need the education at our doors, and we don't go about and seek it. When you get pregnant, there's so many things that you don't know, right? If the baby is head first, if the baby is bottom first, what is that? Is of course, what is that? Right? You know, right? So I'm pregnant and I'm having a baby. Right? That is the experience of most people. But you're pregnant and you need, there's a whole lot of things that you need to learn about your body and the changes that are going to happen with your body. And all of this comes with education. So you have to get yourself educated, and so tell your friend, she's got to call up MAMATOTO, I'm going to leave our leaflets, because we do, Pati does prenatal childbirth classes, which encompasses everything, including the postpartum period, right? So, guys, tell your girls, call the number, right? when you get pregnant or know of someone who is pregnant, for them to be educated about it. Because, you know, like guys, you smoke, and what's something smoking for? It's not me that pregnant, is she? Right? So, all of these are things that guys need to be aware of. Now, a lot of postpartum depression is being discovered that a lot of people are already depressed sometimes when they are pregnant. So, which means that in the postpartum period, it's going to be even worse, right? So, you know, in our society, mental illness, she mad, right? And there's a big stigma about that. So that is what makes people stay in the closet. They don't want to talk about it. No, I'm not depressed. I'm happy. It's so wonderful. You know, you have those sort of a whole rainbow. She's happy, happy, happy. Right? And that is what she's showing to you. I am so happy I'm pregnant. Yes, he is happy too. Right? You know, and you're thinking, but I know her. She don't be like this. And this is before she has the baby. She's already exhibiting some of the signs. Right? The rainbow of emotions that she had. She's on a high. You know, you say, hey, but you know Crystal pregnant? And she gets in the like if she's smoking. Right? That is not Crystal. Right? And these are some of the signs and symptoms that you need a whole sort of personality change, which is not what should happen during pregnancy. Right? And then afterwards she had the baby. And when you meet her now, she's different Crystal. Yes, I have a baby. Yes, it's a girl. Yes, she's fine. Where is the person I know between these two types of emotion? Right? So this is what you get. And in the postpartum period, it's added because you have, when they take away the afterbirth, which is full of estrogen and progesterone. You know, they use afterbirth in lots of the most expensive cosmetics in the world, right? Because it's so rich in hormones. So when they take that away, all of those hormones go down, right? And that is one of the reasons why people tend, because estrogen and progesterone are extremely important hormones in mood disorders, right? Especially in the postpartum period. Now, it's not only postpartum depression. It's called postpartum mood disorders because there's a spectrum of disorders that come in the postpartum, starting with just the baby blues, right? You know, you say, she's always crying, the husband will say. You know, what is she crying for? We have a baby, the baby healthy, but you cry, right? What are you crying for, right? Guys, these are some of the symptoms, right? For no reason, she bursts out crying, right? You went for a beer, you stay too long, you cry. Okay? All of these are signs that you should say in your mind, something not right here, okay? So, you start off with the baby blues, and it is, oh, I don't want to breastfeed the baby, or I want to breastfeed the baby all the time. The baby's on the breast all the time, right? You know, because I'm clinging to this baby, because I'm not feeling myself. So it is extremely important. You don't have to be a doctor to know your partner or to know your friend and see that they're not acting in a normal way. Another reason is to understand that usually it's in the first 2 weeks that you tend to get the baby blues. So if it's going on for a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and so on, you know that this person needs help. Okay? And this is very, very important. They spoke about that we have an encounter group at MAMATOTO. I don't know, it's almost about 8 years old that we have a group. It's advertised in the newspapers all the time. And get two people, we get a lot. So it's underutilized. So please tell your friends, there is help out there. It's free of charge. Right? And a lot of time, if women speak with other women about what is happening, you know, what they have encountered, that helps a lot. Because I remember we had one client who had a baby, and when she came in, the husband was holding the baby, and she came in to the room like this. And she stayed like this all through the group session. She never lifted her head for anything, right? And it doesn't take a genius to realize that something was wrong, right? So, just simple observation, right, of your friend or your partner is going to help. And she didn't want to hold the baby, she didn't want to touch the baby. You hear all about, you know, those sensational ones where people drown their 8 babies and put them to sleep and so on. This has passed the postnatal blues, right? We've gone on to psychosis when it gets like that. But we want to be able to sort of intervene before it gets to that stage. And so therefore, one of the solutions is coming to the encounter group, speaking with other people. And it's all chaired and, you know, led by trained midwives at MAMATOTO. So that is one of the resources that you have. You have other resources which are available to you, like a psychologist. And I wish that in the extended health care centers, this is a wish of mine, right, that there would be encounter groups, and there would be perhaps a psychologist on call and a midwife there, so that we could, using what we call the primary healthcare initiative, you know, at grassroots. You don't have to go Port of Spain. If you live in David Martin, you just go up to by the health center and say, I'm feeling good, you know, right? And in that situation, because you know the nurse and you've been there and so on, you're more likely to speak. That is another solution that helps in the fight against, you know, postpartum depression. Another thing we have to be aware of, that your partner has to adjust and then perhaps have some sort of postpartum depression as well. Because, you know, I can't go out on Friday night anymore. I used to lie on Fridays, right? I'm not sure this is on this Friday. You know, so you ain't too happy, but you never say you're depressed. I ain't depressed, I'm just not happy. Right? So it affects the partners as well, male or female partners. It affects them as well. So it's important, if these two people now are in this situation where both of them are not happy, but nobody's communicating with each other about the fact that they're not happy. It's just a crying because I feel like it, and I'm hungry because I can't go online this Friday night. You know? So it's important that communication takes place, and if you both can't communicate, that you have a third party that you can talk to that will help with the communication. Okay? Pati is going to come and talk to you about some of the treatments for postpartum depression, and excuse me, what they entail, and I am going to have one more thing to say. Now everybody thinks you have to have a baby and then you have postnatal depression. But please remember, people who have miscarriages, they have postnatal depression too. Right? Where there's, you lose the baby, you can make another one, you're young. Right? That's usually what comes out people's mouths. Right? You're young, you have a next one. What happened to you? Right? And a lot of the time, they have because they have nothing. Right? Good? And every time when that date comes around, when they lost the baby, it's a real sad time for them. It's still depression, right? So it's very important. And we also have an encounter group for that at MAMATOTO, free of charge, right? So there are resources that are available to people. And I'm going to give you some handouts that, you know, you can read and pass on to your friends and so on. And with that, I'll stop and let Pati take over. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Pati Garcia. I'm a midwife at MAMATOTO, and I'm also a midwife at my own practice. I call it BirthWorks TV, so it's an independent business I have. And so I'll be speaking from both perspectives, right? Let's see. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. That's why I have my heavy American accent, so I'm sorry. But I've been here 3 years, working as a midwife, and you know, learning a bit of the culture and resources and ways of thinking about the pregnant woman, birth, and the postpartum time. And so for today's topic, I was going to break down a little bit about, from my perspective as a midwife. So I'm going to say the word midwife 1,000 times because I want you to understand that our model of care is completely different than obstetrical care. And when we talk about the causes of postpartum depression, I think the number one thing that gets left out is obstetrical violence. Right? So I would write this down, obstetrical violence, because it's a thing that, have you all heard of this before? No. All right. So it's not there. Right? Because we think, oh, we're just going to go and make a baby at the hospital and everything's going to be fine. Or I'm going to pay a lot of money, go private, and have private care. It's going to be nice because I'm paying for it, right? But we don't even know what we're walking into when we go get care and go give birth, right? So it's difficult to know what to expect and to know how to advocate for yourself, right? So we tend to just go with the flow. Whatever they tell us to do, they're the professionals. To do what they say, right? So to me, as a midwife, what I recognize that is more common and not talked about is how traumatic birth experiences can lead to postpartum depression. And many times, no matter how the woman's given birth, as long as the baby's alive and healthy, and she's alive and healthy, most women's emotional state is going to be dismissed with, why are you so sad? Your baby's fine and you're fine. Right? And so then she never gets a chance to say, I know we're fine, but the way they buffed me up at the hospital maybe brought me down. You know, or the way that I was, I'm not sure I needed this C-section that I had. And now I'm recovering a lot longer than I had planned to. But then people say, oh, but you're fine. Don't worry about it. Right? So there's never a space really where women can say, yeah, I'm happy I have a healthy baby. I'm happy I'm healthy now. But I actually felt really mistreated in my birth process. It's a very vulnerable state that women get into in order to give birth, right? And it's important to have continuous labor support. And that's not really afforded to women using public. And majority of women are using public hospitals, right? So when we go into labor and we go into a public hospital, you go into the antenatal area to labor before you go downstairs to deliver. And so in that time, no one is allowed to come and support you. And that's very, very difficult to get through that pain with no help, right? Maybe other women there are laboring. Maybe some nurses will come and talk to you a little bit or help you out. But most of the time you're on your own. And that's really difficult. It's actually a human rights violation to not have labor support, all right? So it's very important you all read up on that kind of thing too. Because it's important that you influence how public is treating women, right? There are efforts like the Baby Friendly Initiative that many of the public hospitals are trying to live up to. There's certain standards that need to be met. And there's committees others works, how this work is being carried out. But of course, we're not there yet. So before we get into the whole postpartum depression, like, we need to really think about how women are treated in labor, when they're getting ready to push, and how we're treated afterwards. I think a lot of that really influences how they're going to feel when they get home. The next part, I think that we really, I'm not sure what I've heard, I really get to hear anyone speak before, but because I am in the front line of helping women deliver and take care of them postpartum, I'm not sure anyone really realizes, unless they're in it, that when you get home with a baby, or right after you give birth to your baby, that baby's waking up every 2 to 3 hours to feed, right? And I really appreciate someone who said that the fathers also experience postpartum depression. What they also experience is postpartum exhaustion and lack of sleep. So we're talking about sleep deprivation, and that really can mess up your hormones, right? Both men and women. So when you have a couple with a newborn, not getting sleep every 2 to 3 hours and waking up to feed and take care of the baby, and this is non-stop, right? There's no like, oh, the weekend's here, baby's gonna sleep all night, we're gonna recover. There's none of that. It's every 2 to 3 hours non-stop, around the clock, 24/7, right? So, and that's a regular person. So if you have a predisposition for depression, or you had a traumatic birth experience, and then you roll right into this being awake all the time and working with a newborn, the chances of developing postpartum depression increases, right? And especially if you have a traumatic birth, I believe. The hormonal fluctuation afterwards is very intense. So unless you're eating really well, you're eating 3 to 5 meals a day, you have to eat extra when you're breastfeeding. You know, all of that needs to be taken care of like clockwork. So imagine how single women are doing when they don't have someone bringing them food all the time. And we got to think about the physiology of the body, right? We're talking about postpartum depression, which a lot of people think is very just mental and hormonal. But there's also real physical things that are happening. If a woman's given birth, you know, a common practice in Trinidad still is episiotomy. Are you all familiar with the term episiotomy?
Stitches.
Yeah, it's when they cut your vagina to make it wider and then give it stitches. Right? So you all know that now. So do your research. Right? Do your research. Do you want that procedure? No, you don't. So think about that. Then a woman gets stitches, right? Or she has a C-section and then she has stitches here. And so, and then she's back. But if we're gonna be real, I mean, to me, it's just that your guys' society is so fascinating and complex, because y'all can wind down to the ground and your sexuality's out here in your dance, but when we talk about what's really happening, it's so muddled. Everything's so like, there's so many. You can't really talk about anything. So because I'm white, passing, and American, I will take all of that privilege and speak up about these topics that y'all aren't really allowed to speak about, because people are dying, women are dying. So she's raw, her breasts are raw, right, from that new experience. So she's healing here, she's healing here. But yeah, she has to get up, make dinner for herself, maybe her husband, because he doesn't know what she really needs help with. Right? And she's supposed to stay happy, right? While not sleeping, right? With no support, because in the modern age, right? Like success is very much defined by having your own house with your man, and your parents live in another town, or maybe down the street if you're lucky. But that's success, right? When you're in isolation with your little family, right? Right? If you're still living with your family, it's kind of like, are you really successful? Right? But the truth is, that's the modern invention. Because the truth is, how have we survived colonialism? How have we survived being enslaved? Obviously not my ancestors, but I'm talking to a room full of folks, right, that are black. And when we talk about how have you all survived that, that was not in isolation. You all created your families, or I also include myself in the colonized people, here I am. from South America. And my parents are Peruvian and Mexican, right? So there's probably it. But what's important is to understand that those family structures were unique, right? Everyone lived with everybody. Your uncle, your grandparents, great-grandparents, everyone lived together, and everyone had each other's back. Back in the day, before the invention of hospitals, how did we get born? With care, midwives, right? You were in your home, you gave birth at home. Your aunt came down and made you a soup. Your uncle went out in the back and buried your placenta. Your mother was right next to you the whole time. Your whole family was around you. So this postpartum depression thing, I think, is very modern. It has a lot to do with the environment we live in, capitalism, right? Our new definition of success is to be all alone. What? That doesn't work. That doesn't work, right? We have to keep chasing the dollars. So men get 3 days off of work when their wives give birth. If they're lucky, they get the 3 days or none. Or, you know, people accumulate enough vacations, they can take a month off. But it's not like I just want, I'm trying to make you think way outside the box because of the fact that the things that have been survived in the past are not implemented anymore, right? And so one of the things I wanted to say is for postpartum support, in most of our indigenous cultures, we always have the 40 days. And especially in Latin American culture, we have the 40 days of rest, right? Here we have, I think the closest thing that we have to is giving 6 weeks off. And in obstetrical care, you know, there's 6 week checkup, right? And 6 weeks is usually when you're expected to be totally healed. You can go about your business, go back to having sex. That's everybody's like main concern. You start having sex again. 6 weeks is usually the clearance time. Technically, I think it is more like 16 weeks. That's really what the uterus, the time the uterus needs to heal. The scab of where the placenta was, it takes about 16 weeks for that part to heal. So, you can have sex at 6 weeks if you'd like, but I say take more time to rest. So, I'm going all over the place, but just so you all can understand that the reason that I'm speaking is because I am more interested in the ways that have worked for us in the past, things that are accessible, and our families, our community. We think that, I think it's great, there's psychologists, yes, go to psychologists, especially when it gets clinically really, like, you just, not enough family can help you, right? That's important. But there's so many ways that we miss opportunities to help women in the postpartum. And the 40 days of rest is a time that you could plan for before the baby comes. And this is setting up your community to help you, whether it's your cousins, your in-laws, everyone. Everyone can get on something called a meal train, right? Setting up who's going to bring you food in the morning, who's going to bring you food in the middle of the day, in the evening, who's going to stay the night with you, to help you through the night with the baby. What I find with my patients is the women who have their grandmothers, their mothers, a tanty who comes and rubs her down, those women get through it without the depression, right? Have you all heard of the traditional midwives, the women that come and give you a rub? Raise your hand if you've heard of that concept. Okay, good. It's more of an Indo-Trinidadian, doesn't have everyone's mix, it can also go everywhere. These traditions, right? Have you heard of the hog plum bush steam? You guys heard of these things? No? Good. Well, I'm bringing it up because you all are young, and if you don't know about it, then now you can ask, right? And we got to keep these traditions alive because these things are very old. These existed before doctors, and it helped us survive, right? So the women that I work with who get a taboo to come and bind the belly, y'all heard of binding the belly, right? And then getting like an actual massage postpartum. This is all happening in the first few weeks after you've given birth. Those things can really help prevent postpartum depression, right? Because you're getting attention that is very much needed. Because once you give birth in a hospital or private, you might get a 1 week follow-up if you need it. You definitely get one if you get a C-section. But what about the rest of the weeks? Right? You might get a 6-week follow-up, but you might not. What we do at MAMATOTO is we provide you with free care, individualized care. So we're calling you at 24 hours. The third day, the fifth day, we see you at 1 week. Then we call you every week. We're checking how's your bleeding going, how your breast feel, how's breastfeeding going, how's your heart? Because it's important, right? How's your heart? Who's coming around to help you? Where's your partner? Oh, my partner had to go back to work. Okay, how much time are you spending alone? Oh, you know, it's been like 6 to 8 hours a day. But sometimes he has to work late, so I don't know. So sometimes I'm alone 10 hours a day. Being alone is the hardest thing to go through postpartum. So many hours alone in your first feelings is not helpful. So it's about trying to find someone to come in that time to support you, right? But going back to care, what does care look like from a midwife's perspective? It's checking on a woman and finding out, oh, no one's there? No one's there every day to help you? Oh gosh. Alright, so let's brainstorm. Who can come? Oh, everyone's working. Okay. Are you in a financial position to get a domestic worker, someone to come and really tidy up while you sleep? You know, things like that. So getting creative about who could come over and keep you company, right? Because being alone and having a crying baby and being sore, right? Your mind will go. And your hormones aren't stable. You're still going through this hormonal fluctuation. So I'm telling you all this to paint the picture of how easy it can be to go into postpartum depression, right? Being alone. So I spoke a little bit about old traditions, how they're still very useful. And then the more modern solutions that are still kind of alternative would be something like postpartum doulas. Have you heard of a birth doula? Labor support professional. So then a postpartum doula is postpartum support professional, right? She'll tend to do things like breastfeeding support, baby care support, light housekeeping, maybe some like cooking, right? You hire her a few hours. So that's like for those women that, you know, have access to funds and they live on their own, mom lives abroad or whatever. You can always hire a postpartum doula. There's something called placenta encapsulation. We're the only mammals that do not eat our placenta after we give birth. So, the placenta has hormones that will help balance out your hormones after you've given birth. So in Chinese medicine, come on, hear me out for a second. In Chinese medicine, the way the body is viewed is that when you're pregnant, you're in a heated state. You have excessive heat, right? And so then once you give birth, that heat leaves your body and you're in a cold state. So the idea is to prepare the placenta. It's cleaned and then it's cooked and then it's dehydrated, made into dust, into capsules, and you can take it postpartum. So it doesn't look like a placenta anymore once you get it. Really cute capsules. Once you take it, it begins to give you that heat that you were missing. Don't fry it. No, just steam it.
It's curry placenta.
Almost.
Oh, placenta curry.
I think Cherene placenta curry. But it's true because we do use ginger. But listen, so what it offers is it helps balance out the hormones, right?
Would it work for a placenta that's not yours?
You could, but it's not very common that people do that. Yeah. In China they do it. Right? Chinese
A placenta that's not yours.
Yeah. But placentas in all our products. Skincare products, makeup, shampoos. So don't be surprised that.
Can you tell me which one?
Let's get
The
the
most
placenta.
commercial one. Read in the back.
Yeah.
I promise.
It says placenta as an ingredient.
So how does
You know, sometimes they use the placenta.
You like them all the placenta, yeah.
Exactly.
Serious.
hormones to help you balance out those fluctuations in hormones. It helps you produce more breast milk and helps your uterus contract and go back down to its size. That's the other thing women are going through postpartum. In the postpartum period is when they breastfeed, they're also having contractions still, cramps, real strong cramps to allow the rest of the blood to come out. So women are in pain after they've given birth, and they're tender and soft, and they need to be in bed, cuddled up with their baby for at least 2 weeks straight. At least, because if they can rest hard in those 2 weeks, then they'll recover pretty well and pretty fine. But if they go home and they have to handle a lot of things in those first 2 weeks, then their bleeding will continue, and that will cause anemia. They'll feel sick, and this is just going to drain them, right? So if they don't have support, then they're struggling, and they're more likely to go into postpartum depression, right? I just wanted to break down like exactly what's happening. I'm not sure if anyone else did that, like what's actually happening in the body.
Definitely you went into
Everything is great. I think that's part of postpartum depression. I think it's not just a state that exists in isolation. I think it's the entire society. We don't get told anything positive about our bodies growing up. It's don't get pregnant, don't get a disease. No one says, make sure you get that orgasm, girl. Right? And so then, but we get pregnant and then we're expected to give birth and take care of the baby and be perfect. But we can't talk about our periods. We can't even look at our blood. We can't touch our blood. We can't smell it because it's disgusting. So we have a divorced relationship from our menstruation. But yeah, we're supposed to be really cool and I can give birth and breastfeed and be perfect. No, we already are hating ourselves because we bleed. Right? It came again every month. Right? So we already have a warped sense of ourselves because of how we relate to our wombs. Right? Am I saying lies?
No.
Thank you. Right. So here we are, not really understanding our bodies, not really liking it. We can only like it in this very specific way, and I cannot be bleeding, right? And then we're postpartum, and all we're doing is bleeding for days and days and days. So how disgusting do we feel in our postpartum? Not sexy, right? Well, and then your postpartum womb, it takes time to go down. Right? So a week later, you're still going to have this little pouch, this big little pouch. Because a lot of women here are like thin, and then they have their postpartum pouch. And they're judging themselves. Oh, so much going on. I'm talking about women who aren't even having postpartum depression. Right? This is just how it is. So imagine how easy it is to slip into postpartum depression. Right? And not know that you're in it, because you've already lived most of your life hating your period, and now you're like, oh, this baby needs to be fed, and I am ugly, and I feel awful, but you don't know that you're actually way off the deep end already. Right? It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. We have the 3 months off. I think it's great in Trinidad. That's one of my reasons I stayed, because no matter what, in the U.S., I can't take 3 months off of work after having a baby. So that's an advantage. That's really good that Trinidad has that. You get 3 months. But I think it should be longer. It should be at least 6 months, right? Because it's a whole year. It should be a whole year. But what I like about the 6 months, you gotta start somewhere, right? If you want to exclusively breastfeed, you have to do that for 6 months. And it'll just be easier if you already have that time off. Because you could develop depression even. Let me talk about how postpartum depression isn't just in the first few weeks and months. You could be fine for 3 months, and then you have to go back to work. Now your baby's in daycare, you're at work pumping. And you get home and you walk in bed, you're just like, oh, this does not feel right. I want to be home in bed with my baby. Right? So the depression could come after that time. Right, so I think in order to prevent postpartum depression, if you get more time off from work into the 6 months or more, then you're more likely to prevent postpartum depression. What else? I'm almost done. I think the last thing that I just really want you to take home is that we need community. Because we don't heal in isolation. We don't heal with solitude, right? We need everyone around us all the time to support the postpartum period. Some of the resources that we were mentioning that we have at MAMATOTO that are severely underutilized is our postpartum support group. But right now we're trying to attract anyone to come. So it's the mommies to be and new mommies group. So if you're pregnant, you can come to the group. You can hear what women who have just had their babies are going through. And it's for your first year postpartum. So if you have a 10-month-old, you could still come to a postpartum group because everyone's going through different things at different times. And so someone who's 1 week postpartum really needs to hear the woman who's 3 months postpartum say, oh man, those first 2 weeks were tough. But by week 3, we got a little bit better, right? So that's why it's important for all women to come. The father support group is really successful, and it's the fathers to be the fathers group. So if your partner's newly pregnant, then you can come, right? And Dianne had touched on loss as a postpartum state, like if you have a miscarriage or if you give birth and you lose your baby. And I know this is a taboo thing that's going to come out of my mouth, but I am from the United States, so I have a lot of privilege, and I'm going to share that with you. Abortion, termination, that's much more common than giving birth, and that is also a state where you can slip into postpartum depression. And I just really need to put it out there because y'all are young, and so maybe you have friends that have had to go through termination, or termination, let's call it that. And there's a lot of taboo around it because the idea is that people say technically it's illegal in Trinidad. The truth is it's not illegal. There's just a very tight way to get an abortion here, and it is that you have to have 2 doctors that agree that if you get that procedure that is more beneficial to you to get that procedure rather than carry a child to term, right? So you could get an abortion here very legally. Of course, it's not for poor people, right? If you have money, you can get one legit and it's all good. But there's also no awareness because of the taboo subject, number 1 of abortion, and then postpartum depression. People think you have to have a baby, you have to have carried to a certain amount to feel sad about a loss. That is also a loss. And so we need to keep an eye out for that. The poor people's abortion is to take Cytotec and slip and fall and go to the hospital and say, I'm having a miscarriage. Help me out here. Right? This is how we do abortion in Trinidad. And I think it's really important that we be very honest with each other and open to supporting one another when we experience these things. Right? So, sorry to bring such a